Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top-shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's C-O, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order.
You've heard of John D. Rockefeller, but what about the rest of the Rockefellers? Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and we are not done with the Rockefellers yet. I don't think we're ever going to be done with the Rockefellers because just once these episodes are done, that doesn't mean that they've stopped doing whatever they're doing in the shadows. But today we're going over the rest of the Rockefeller family. If you've missed it, I dropped the John D. Rockefeller episode. That's all about John D. Rockefeller, his life, how he came to be with the Standard Oil Company. It's really like an American dream rags to riches type story. So go check that out. But now we're going to learn about the rest of the family. It's really important, like I said in that episode, you cannot understand all the conspiracy theories or like who is doing what, where, without knowing what the whole family is up to include John D. But we got John D. Jr., we've got John D. the Third, we've got David and Nelson and all these, you got people on people on people in this family. So we're going to kind of like go down almost like a family tree to really understand what the heck is going on in this family. So John D. Rockefeller and Seti had 5 children. They had Elizabeth, who was called Bessie. They had Alice, and Alice actually only lived for 13 months. They had Alta, Edith, and then John Davidson Rockefeller Jr. Because of the time that they were all alive, there is just not as much about any of the females in the family. So we're going to hit on all the sisters before we hit on John Jr., but there's just not that much about them. Then we're going to get to John Jr., and there's a lot about him, and then he had a bunch of children. He had like one daughter. Not much about the daughter, but a bunch about all his children, all of his sons. It's not like me being, misogynistic or whatever. It's just the time the women weren't really doing that much and the men were. So we're going to start with the oldest, Bessie. Like I said, there's not much about her. She went to school at Vassar College, which is one of the colleges that John D. Rockefeller donated money to. This college was the second in the U.S. that granted women degrees. And the school's first dormitory is named after Bessie. It's called Strong Hall because her last name wouldn't stay Rockefeller. It would turn to Strong. And this is because John donated $35,000 toward the construction of the dorms. Bessie married Charles Strong in 1889. And the couple only had one daughter together. Her name was Margaret Rockefeller Strong. Bessie died at the age of 40 in 1906. Margaret, however, helped to grow the family real estate by purchasing townhomes on Park Avenue in New York. And these townhomes, they were going to be demolished. So she purchased them. She made them all pretty again. She gave one of the townhomes to Queen Sofia Spanish Institute and donated another to her cousin, David, who we will get into David later on, who founded the Center for Inter-American Relations there. So that was what was based out of the townhome she gave to David. She would later donate her father's estate in Italy to Georgetown University. Really quick, it is important to know that Charles Strong was the son of Augustus Hopkins Strong, who was a Baptist priest, and he was actually good friends with John D. Rockefeller, which might make sense as to why Charles Strong and Bessie Rockefeller got married. It feels like every single marriage in this family was strategic, and every career that they decided to pursue or like philanthropic avenue they went down, it's all for a reason. I feel like they didn't actually give to somebody like out of the goodness of their heart. They always did it for some ulterior motive. Next, we're going to talk about Alta. So I'm skipping Alice. She only lived for 13 months. She died of dysentery. But honestly, I could not imagine losing a baby that young. Anyway, let's get into Alta. So she was the third born of Rockefeller Sr. She married Ezra Parmalee Prentice in 1863. And honestly, there's not like a whole lot known about Ezra. They were married by the president of Brown University, which I thought was an important thing to note. Ezra's grandfather was a Vermont Supreme Court justice, and his family founded Yale University. So, strong ties there. They had 3 children together. They had John Rockefeller Prentice, who went to Yale and Yale Law School before he became a cattle breeder. They had Mary, who went to Vassar College. And they had Spellman, who was the founder of Prenalta Corporation, which ran oil and gas operations. It is important to know that John D. Rockefeller gifted Alta 12,000 shares of Standard Oil Indiana, which became Amoco. You will notice that John Sr. plays favorites. Alta was for sure one of them because she got so many shares of Standard Oil Indiana. She founded Alta House. This was like a settlement house in Cleveland, and the settlement movement was big in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This was a way to bring like rich people and poor people together in close proximity, which they are still doing today. Anyway, so the couple bought 1,400 acres in Massachusetts. And there they had their Elm Tree House and Mount Hope Farm. So Elm Tree House was built on their Mount Hope farm. This became the most valuable estate in Berkshire Hills. They hired several geneticists to develop a more profitable farm, which might be why their first son went into cattle breeding, is because they had this farm. Alta died in 1962, leaving her New York City brownstone to the Museum of Modern Art. That seems weird, right? Like, why not leave it to one of your 3 children? Nope, she left it to the Museum of Modern Art, which this museum comes up a lot. The Rockefellers like basically own the Museum of Modern Art in New York. They ended up tearing it down because it was right next to the museum. So they tore down the brownstone and built a new wing of the museum in its place. The Berkshires property was willed to New York's Lenox Hill Hospital, and Elm Tree House was purchased by Williams College. So again, why are you not giving these things to your children, your grandchildren? Nope, you're like giving it to hospitals and colleges and museums. That seems weird to me. Anyway, let's move on to Edith. She was the 4th child of John D. and Laura Seti Rockefeller. And she was a socialite. So not a favorite, that's for sure. Alta was for sure a favorite. Anyway, she married Harold Fowler McCormick. He was the chairman of the board of International Harvester Company, and they made farm equipment. The couple together had 5 children. John Rockefeller McCormick, who died at the age of 4 from scarlet fever. Again, like my heart just like wants to sink. But I know it was the time. I get it, but like, I don't know, it hurts my heart a little bit. Editha, who also died young, sometime in the first year of her life or so, which like, how do you keep having children after this? Like, oh, I don't know. Then they had Harold Fowler Jr., Muriel, and Matilda. However, there's not a lot of information about what the surviving kids did with their lives. Edith and her father didn't always see eye to eye because he was like super frugal because of the way that he was raised and he grew up and he understood what it was like to be poor. Edith did not know what it was like to be poor. She loved to spend money. So this is where they were like, not, she was not a favorite because she was like spending money doing things that her father didn't really like. He still supported her, but not really exactly what he would have envisioned for his daughter. However, after her first son died, she and her husband established the John McCormick Institution of Infectious Diseases in Chicago. And there, they did isolate the bacterium responsible for scarlet fever. So something really positive came out of the fact that their son died. However, it's still really sad that their son died. She also helped fund the juvenile probation program in Chicago. She also supported the Art Institute and the Grand Opera Company. But then her and Harold divorced in 1921. In 1925, she, along with other wealthy Chicago women, sponsored the Women's World Fair. And this was to celebrate the achievements and progress of American women, which is huge in the early 1900s. Like, we still weren't really fond of women. I mean, they're fine. They're doing what they're doing. Anyway, she died in 1932, and her real estate went into a trust that her father set up for her. And it was mostly real estate. Like, she didn't have too much Standard Oil stock. But she didn't just, like, donate it to random organizations like her sister did. But that is the Rockefeller daughters. Now we get into John D. Rockefeller Jr. He is the fifth and only son of John D. Sr., and I'm going to refer to him as Jr. most of the time because it gets challenging. As a kid, he went to Browning School, which was a school to get kids ready for university, basically. And this school was in a brownstone that the Rockefellers owned. So again, they're putting their fingers in all the schools, like every school. They literally founded the General Education Board. So they're doing some things with education. We'll get into that, I promise. He wanted to attend Yale, but was persuaded to go to the Baptist-oriented Brown University instead. And after graduation, he joined John Sr. in business. Makes total sense. He set up operations at 26 Broadway in New York City and became the director of Standard Oil. So Daddy is like, here, have some business. By some business, I mean literally all of it. He later became the director of JP Morgan's U.S. Steel Company. However, in 1910, he resigned from both companies, so Standard Oil and JP Morgan's Steel Company, in an attempt to purify his reputation because he wanted to be really philanthropic, with commercial and financial interests, but there was this scandal. Actually, there was a couple scandals. So first things first, there was a bribery scandal involving the higher-ups in Standard Oil and two prominent members of Congress that Jr. was trying to separate himself from. But also, there was the Ludlow Massacre, which we're going to get into in just a second. But let's talk about his family first. So, Jr. married Abigail Green Aldrich, Abby for short, in 1901. Together, they had 6 children. So they had Abby, who would go by Babs, in 1903. They had John D. Rockefeller III in 1906, Nelson in 1908, Lawrence in 1910, Winthrop in 1912, and David in 1915. These boys go on to do crazy things. None of them died young. They all lived. But we're going to go in depth in every single one of John Jr.'s children as well, because it's really important that you know all about these guys, especially David. In 1913, the Colorado Coalfield War broke out. So this was a major strike declared by the United Mine Workers of America against the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. So Jr. owned a controlling interest in this company, and after about 7 months of this strike, the Ludlow Massacre occurred at the tent camp. So a little bit about this situation. The miners lived in the town owned by the company. And this was pretty common. That miner, like, they basically build a town wherever the mines are. That way miners have access to like stores, markets, different things. They all have a place to live, all these things, because typically mines are really far away from the rest of society. So these miners would bring their whole families, they'd move into a house owned by the company, they'd shop at stores owned by the company. And actually, what was pretty messed up about this situation, they weren't even being paid in US currency. They were basically being paid in notes that only worked at the miners' stores, which are also owned by the company. So the company's paying miners, and the miners are turning around and giving the money right back to the company. But they don't have a way to escape this situation because they're never getting paid in US currency, and that's the only way that they would be able to not be miners anymore. If they wanted to not be miners. I'm not saying that they did. I don't know. I wasn't there. But if at any point they were like, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to move my family up to Denver because it was in Colorado, they wouldn't be able to do that because they weren't being paid in money that would ever help them get to Denver. So they went on strike. And also, outside of that, the working conditions were horrendous. The living conditions were horrendous. They worked long hours. It was dirty. It was not safe at all. So they went on strike. When they went on strike, they moved into like a tent camp out of their houses because their houses were owned by the company as part of their strike. The company brought in extra people to work in the mines while the strike was going on. The Ludlow Massacre was an attack on the tent camp where the strikers were living by the Colorado National Guard and private security, which was hired by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. The National Guard and this like hired help, they weren't supposed to be like attacking these camps. They were just supposed to be like keeping the peace between the people that are coming to actually work in the mines versus the people that are striking. It wasn't ever supposed to get as bad as it was, and it was awful. 21 people died, and this include like the striking miners, some of their wives, some children. It was bad. Junior appeared before the U.S. congressional hearing and was blamed for the massacre, and he just like took the blame. He was like, yeah, absolutely, like we fucked up. But of course, after that, Junior was still trying to keep his reputation clean, and he needed this positive media attention in order to do that. So he swallowed his pride, personally went to Colorado, inspected the conditions of the workers, listened to the grievances, and he did this to attract positive media attention and kind of humanize the Rockefeller family. I'm not sure he did this for the miners. I think he did this for himself. I don't know for sure, but I also do think it's kind of hard for people when you have that much money and that much influence and your life is so much drastically different than somebody that works in a mine. There's no way you can really relate to what they're going through. So yeah, you're going there, you're like trying to listen to them, you're trying to be a good guy. You're just never really going to understand what they're going through. So you're kind of just doing this for yourself at this point. During the Depression, he was involved in the financing, development, and construction of the Rockefeller Center in Midtown Manhattan. This caused him to become one of the largest real estate holders in New York City. Rockefeller Center attracted like blue chip corporations such as GE, NBC, the Associated Press, Time Incorporated, branches of the Chase National Bank. This is also where the family office moved from 26 Broadway, to 30 Rockefeller Plaza. You know, 30 Rock, like the show. This is the same place. Currently, the Rockefeller family does not own it any longer. However, they still manage it. They just don't own it anymore. In 1921, Junior received about 10% of the shares of Equitable Trust Company from his father, which made him the largest shareholder. So John Sr. started giving away his shares in things to his children to continue, like, to make sure that the family was taken care of, everything was good, but he knew he was going to die soon, like, he was pretty old at this point, so he gave it to his son because his son was going to continue and now be the head of the company and the head of the family. In 1930, Equitable merged with Chase National Bank, which made Chase the largest bank in the world at the time. This merger caused now Junior's stock holdings to be reduced to only 4%, but he was still the largest shareholder, and the bank became known as the Rockefeller Bank. But if you remember, this is the bank where all of their money is held. This bank is so important. We're going to get into so much about this bank.
Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's CO, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order. Summer is the season of hot temperatures, outdoor adventures, and refreshing water activities. Summer is also the season of rough on your feet, causing dry, cracked heels and toes. Introducing Babyfoot, the original exfoliation foot peel that contains 16 natural extracts formulated to remove dead skin cells in 3 easy steps. Apply the booties, relax for an hour, then wash your feet. In 14 days, you've got baby smooth skin and your feet have never been softer. Letting dead skin cells build up over time is hazardous to your foot health. Our professional-grade DIY products, like our original exfoliation foot peel, our men's foot peel, or our moisturizing mask, are some of the best foot care products on the market, created with your foot health in mind. Pamper yourself with a spa day from the comfort and convenience of your own home with Babyfoot. If you want a chemical-free, easy-to-use exfoliating process from the company that created the original foot peel, it's time to treat yourself to Babyfoot. Go to babyfoot.com and use the code SUMMERFEET24 and get 20% off your first order with Babyfoot. That's babyfoot.com and use the code SUMMERFEET24.
Anyway, Chase Bank, that's where the money is held, also called the Rockefeller Bank. In the late 20s, Rockefeller founded Dunbar National Bank in Harlem, and this bank mainly served African American clientele because it was in Harlem, but also they employed African American tellers, clerks, and bookkeepers, which again, this is the late 1920s. The African American population, like yes, we don't have slaves anymore, right? The Civil War happened, but the civil rights movement hasn't fully gotten rid of this like segregation thing. So for them to be hiring African Americans is like a huge deal, but also the bank is in Harlem, so you're going to have mostly African American clientele. They're going to want to walk into the bank and see people like them helping them out. If they see a bunch of white people, they're less likely to use the bank. Makes sense, especially the way white people treated black people. It was horrendous. Though John Sr. supported the prohibition, Jr. didn't like it at all. He thought that it kind of like increased this disrespect of the law. So he actually wrote a letter about it. And this was super important because it was like the event that pushed for the repeal of the prohibition. Junior, like his family before him, gave a lot of money to charity. So Senior's mom, like I said, taught him that it's really important to give money. And all of his sisters give money, his dad, everybody, they're giving money constantly. Junior became the president of his father's foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and he also became involved in other organizations that his father had set up, such as Rockefeller University, which is a graduate university only that focuses on the biomedical research, and the International Education Board. Junior supported the League of Nations, which was the first organization to focus on world peace. He funded the formation and ongoing expenses of the Council of Foreign Relations, which was a think tank focused on American foreign policy and international relations. Which, okay, can we talk about this for a second, though? So he's supporting the League of Nations, which is an organization about world peace. He's funding the formation of the Council of Foreign Relations, which is about American foreign policy. Why didn't he get into politics? Because you're pulling strings behind the curtain? Seems odd. But don't worry, because his kids do that too. Sorry, there's so many conspiracies. And just like reading the history about the Rockefellers, you don't even have to know the conspiracies. But if you're you have conspiracies on the mind, you're going to find them. He founded the Bureau of Social Hygiene, which researched social issues like prostitution and venereal disease, and supported birth control clinics and research into birth control. On 2 different occasions, he donated $5,000 to Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League. So she was kind of like the face of birth control at the time. Junior's wife, Abby, co-founded the Museum of Modern Art, and he gave his property on West 54th Street in Manhattan to the museum. Remember that Ulta also gave some property to the museum. Junior helped pay for the auditorium at College of William and Mary. In 1940, he hosted the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous for dinner, and this kind of started a frenzy for the Alcohol Anonymous book. He bought land along the East River in Manhattan and donated it to the United Nations headquarters. Like, that's where they built it. And this makes sense with him supporting the League of Nations, and that he donated quite a bit to help France rebuild after World War I. Outside of all of that, because obviously he's founding organizations, lots of things, he was super interested in conservation. Like, this was one of his main things. He bought and donated land for many of America's national parks, to include Grand Teton, Mesa Verde, Acadia, Great Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Shenandoah. And because of all of his generosity with the parks, John D. Rockefeller Jr. Memorial Parkway, which connects Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, and the Rockefeller Memorial in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park were both named after him because of how much he gave to the national parks. He would just like buy the land and be like, this is national park land now and it belongs to you. And like give it to the government. I don't know. He was super active in the movement to save the redwood trees, which caused them to name a forest after him in the Humboldt Redwood State Park. In the 1940s, he purchased Phillipsburg Manor House in North Tarrytown, New York, which is now Sleepy Hollow. In 1945, he bought Washington Irving's house. In 1951, he established Sleepy Hollow Restorations, which managed both those historic sites. So the Phillipsburg Manor House and Washington Irving's house. And later, they would buy another manor and donate that to the Sleepy Hollow Restorations as well. In 1986, Sleepy Hollow Restoration became Historic Hudson Valley. And so that now operates these historic sites as well as tours through the Rockefeller family estate. John D. Rockefeller Jr. died of pneumonia on May 11th, 1960, at the age of 86. His children continued in their father and their grandfather's footsteps. So let's talk about them. So Abby, or Babs, the first child and only daughter of John Jr. and Abby, was a philanthropist. Her brothers would go on to do like really big things, but Abby would mostly stay out of the public eye. She was on the board of trustees of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which was set up by her brothers in 1940. She was on the board of trustees of the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and an honorary trustee of the Rockefeller Family Fund. She married 3 times and had 2 children. Her first marriage was to David Milton, who was a lawyer and a banker. They were married for 18 years and had 2 children together, Abigail and Marilyn. They like to use family names, so you've got Abby and then Abby and then Abby in 3 different generations. Her second marriage was to Dr. Irving Pardee, who was a neurologist, and his brother was like a famous cardiologist. They were married until he died, and then she married Jean Maze. I think I'm saying that right. He was also a banker, and he was actually the a senior vice president of United States Trust Company. Babs died on May 27th of 1976. Her first daughter, Abigail, married George Dorr O'Neill, who was an American investment company executive and was also served as a trustee of Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, which, of course, the Rockefellers had a huge part in. He also was a trustee of the Village of Oyster Bay Cove and Educational Broadcasting Corporation. He was also the commissioner of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So this guy had his hands in some pots, which actually probably helped the Rockefeller brothers. And when I talk about the Rockefeller brothers, I'm almost always referring to John Jr.'s 5 sons. Anyway, Babs' second daughter, Marilyn, went on to marry William Kelly Simpson, who is the son of Kenneth F. Simpson, who was a Republican House of Representatives member. Anyway, next let's get into John D. Rockefeller III. So he went to school at Princeton University, and he got his Bachelor of Science in Industrial Relations. He said it was because of the Ludlow Massacre and like all the work that his father had to put in to fix the family's reputation after that, which is why he went into industrial relations. And with this degree, he became the family manager of all social things, which makes sense. Due to this, he sat on 20 boards of different institutions, most of which were family related, obviously, to include the Rockefeller University, Colonial Williamsburg, which is like a living history museum, Riverside Church, International House of New York, General Education Board, Bureau of Social Hygiene, Industrial Relations Counselor, so on. He was also a member of many foreign policy boards, so the Council of Foreign Relations, Foreign Policy Association, Institute of Pacific Relations. He even accompanied different Secretary of States on trips and consulted with them. He founded the Asia Society, which is focused on educating the world about Asia. He founded the Population Council, which conducts research in biomedicine, social science, and public health, which I feel like both his father and grandfather established other councils or foundations or whatever to do these exact same things. He set up the United Negro College Fund to help African Americans continue their education. He spent a good portion of his money on Asian culture programs. This was like John III's thing. He was a key member in raising funds for like musical arts center, which would later become the Lincoln Center. He married Blanchett Ferry Hooker and had 4 children together. John D. Rockefeller IV, who went on to become the U.S. Senator from West Virginia and also was a 2-term governor of West Virginia. Then they also had Hope, Sandra, and Elida, who were their daughters. John III died in a car accident on July 10th of 1978. Junior's 3rd son was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, or Rocky for short. He wasn't the brightest of the Rockefeller grandchildren, which meant he didn't get into Princeton, as 2 of his brothers had, or Yale, or any of those. Instead, he went to Dartmouth College. Nelson was a businessman and a politician. In fact, he served as the Assistant Secretary of State for American Republic Affairs, Under Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Governor of New York, and the Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford in the mid-1970s. Before his political life, he worked at Chase National Bank, where the family's wealth is held, and at Rockefeller Center. He also worked as chairman for a couple different oil companies, which makes total sense because the family was founded in oil. Just like every other man in his family, he created foundations and corporations. You know how the Rockefellers like to just create things and throw money at things. He established the American International Association of Economic and Social Development. He formed the International Basic Economy Corporation. The point of this corporation was to invest in Latin America, which, like, I don't know. I find it weird that John the Third was really interested in Asia and Nelson's really interested in Latin America, which, like, makes me wonder, like, what other continents are the other brothers going to pick, you know? Anyway, outside of being a businessman and politician, he was really interested in art. He had a significant art collection and served as trustee, treasurer, and president of the Museum of Modern Art. This is, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because Abby founded or co-founded this museum, so the whole family's just going to throw everything into this museum. He also, so Nelson, founded the Museum of Primitive Art to kind of follow in his mother's footsteps. Nelson married Mary Todd Hunter Clark, and they had 5 children together. They had Rodman, Anne, Stephen, and twins Michael and Mary. Michael disappeared in New Guinea in November of 1961. Everyone assumes that he drowned while on like a kayaking trip. Nelson and Mary divorced, and then Nelson married Margaretta Large Fittler and had 2 more children with her, Nelson Jr. and Mark. Nelson was a known cheater, which is what ended his first marriage and might have began his second marriage. I don't know. There's a conspiracy about this, and we'll go over it in the conspiracy episode, but like he for sure cheated on everybody constantly. Actually, there was even like a thing that I read saying that after him and Mary got married, you know, and they have all these kids together, but they kind of agreed that it was a better image if they stayed married, but they didn't have to actually like each other, and they could just like live in separate parts of the house, but they should stay married for the social aspect of it, their reputation, and also for the children. But I think once Nelson started cheating on Mary with Margaretta, she was done. She left. Nelson died on January 26th of 1979 of a heart attack right after he got out of office. Now we are on to Lawrence, who was the 4th child of John Jr. and Abby Aldrich. He studied at Princeton as well, and then he went to Harvard Law School. He dropped out of Harvard because he decided he didn't want to be a lawyer. So that seems reasonable. Lawrence inherited his grandfather's seat on the New York Stock Exchange, and he was also a leading figure in pioneering the field of venture capitalism. So a venture capital is a form of private equity financing, if you are unfamiliar. This led to him and his siblings opening up Venrock Associates, which was pivotal in the early funding of like Intel and Apple computers. They were also involved in healthcare projects. Imagine that. Unlike his brothers, his major interest was in aviation. He made considerable investments into Eastern Airlines, which became the most profitable airline after World War II. He also funded the military contractor McDonnell Aircraft Corporation, so very into aviation. He was considered by President Lyndon Johnson for the newly formed position Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, but he was passed up for somebody else. He was a longtime friend of the co-founder of Reader's Digest, and he was also appointed the outside director of the company. And it was important that Reader's Digest maintained its patriotic mission for like of informing and educating the public and supporting national parks. So that was one of Lawrence's like big pushes when he was on that board. I feel like he was kind of the outcast of the family. Not like really outcast, but he just did things differently than everybody else was doing. So he founded Rock Resorts Incorporated, which opened environmentally friendly hotels in the Virgin Islands, which nobody else had ventured into hotels yet. He funded Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which his sister was on the board of. He also funded Lindisfarne Association, the New York Zoological Society, the Mirror Theater Limited, and research of the Pear Lab. Now, that second one, Lindisfarne Association, is pretty interesting because it's like a think tank and retreat that brings prominent people together for the study and realization of a new planetary culture. New World Order. Anyway, like I said, you guys can read between the lines and kind of figure out where I'm going to go with this when we get to the conspiracies, but here we are. In the last one, the Pear Lab was a Princeton-based research program that studied psychic abilities, which is pretty cool, but also like feels very MK Ultra of them. Anyway, Lawrence and his niece, Winthrop's stepdaughter, both of whom we haven't talked about yet, so Winthrop or his stepdaughter, were trying to establish the UFO Disclosure Initiative with the Clinton White House in the 90s. Basically, they wanted all the UFO information to be released to the public. This would include information that the CIA and the Air Force both had because of like Roswell incident and Hangar 18, if you haven't listened to that. Just, different things. They were like, yeah, you guys should just let everybody know everything. They weren't into it. Nope. But just like his father, conservation was super important to Lawrence, so he expanded many of the national parks that his father had helped to establish. So John Jr. was like, here's all this land for parks. And Lawrence was like, yeah, we should give more land for parks. Lawrence married Mary French, whose grandfather was the president of Northern Pacific Railway. So you can see the connection there. Together, the two of them had 4 children: Laura, Marion, Dr. Lucy, I felt like I should include that she is a doctor, and Lawrence Jr. Most of them worked in philanthropy and as environmentalists. So like Dr. Lucy, she wasn't like a medical doctor. She had her PhD. Lawrence died on July 11th, 2004. Winthrop Rockefeller was the 5th child of John Jr. and Abby. But he was the 4th male. So the 5th kid, but the 4th brother out of the 5. Just like the rest of his family, he was a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and politician. He attended Yale University, but didn't graduate. Instead, he went to work in the oil industry, which, again, makes total sense because of who these people are, right? In 1941, Winthrop joined the Army. He enlisted into the Army. He was not an officer. He enlisted. Eventually, during his military career, he would become an officer, but when he first went in, he joined as a private. And this was while the U.S. was still like a neutral party, and put that in quotations because we all know that we were never really a neutral party. And I did a podcast episode about that too. This was World War II. But he stayed in the Army until the war was over. Winthrop hung his hat in Arkansas, where he ran for governor in 1964 and lost. I know you thought that I was going to say he won. He didn't. But he did run again in 1966, and he won that one. So, it wasn't all bad. At the same time, though, Nelson was the governor of New York. So both being affiliated with the Republican Party. They're like, yep, we're Republicans. We're both going to be governors right now. And they did. In 1968, both brothers put their hats in for the presidential race. This was the first time ever, and this has ever happened ever, that 2 brothers were running against each other for the presidential seat, basically. As we know, Winthrop didn't get anywhere. Nelson didn't get the presidential selection, but he got the vice presidential selection. And then he won. Nelson had a better chance of winning, but as we know, he ultimately became the vice president instead of the actual president. Winthrop would remain the governor of Arkansas until 1971. He married actress, I'm going to mess this name up, I'm really sorry, Jivut Paul Cute, I think is how you would say that, in 1948. They had one son together, Winthrop Jr., who also went on to eventually be the governor of Arkansas. which I thought was funny. In 1954, the couple divorced. 2 years later, he married Jeanette Idris. Idris? It could be either of those. She already had 2 children from a previous marriage, Bruce and Anne. Anne was the one that was helping Lawrence with the UFO disclosure initiative. Winthrop died young. He was very young, actually. He was only like 60, I think. He died in 1973 of pancreatic cancer. He was the youngest of all of John Jr.'s children to die. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have David Rockefeller, who is the youngest child of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Abby Aldrich, and the guy that's just doing the crazy things. He has been referred to as the most evil person on earth. And like Hitler was around. So that's fun. Anyway, David went to Harvard University and studied economics. He once dated Kathleen Kennedy, who is like the second of the Kennedy children. So she was the sister of John and Bobby Kennedy. So one of the 9 that the Kennedys had. They did not get married, but I thought it was really important because we're going to get into the Illuminati, and the Kennedys and the Rockefellers are both associated with the Illuminati. So, now you have that information for you. He got his PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. And then he worked in government for like a super short time. First as like a secretary to the New York mayor. And even though he was a secretary, he had his own office. I don't know how he finagled that, but he did. And then as the assistant regional director of the U.S. Office of Defense, Health, and Welfare Services. And then he followed his brother Winthrop and joined the army. But he went straight into officer candidate school in 1943. While Winthrop was serving in the Pacific Theater, David was serving in the European Theater. So one of them was like in Japan and the other one was in France. In 1946, he joined the staff of Chase National Bank. Imagine that. At that time, his uncle was the chairman, but not his uncle from the Rockefeller side, his uncle from the Aldrich side. So Abby's brother, who was also a Winthrop, his name was Winthrop, he was the chairman at Chase National Bank, which makes total sense because of the Rockefellers, and the family is so ingrained in everything that they do. So at this time, Chase National Bank obviously holds the family's wealth. I've mentioned that so many times, but they also heavily finance the oil industry, and they work with like big ticket companies like General Electric. So they weren't working with like mom and pop people yet. I mean, now they do, but they weren't at the time. They were just working with like really big companies, really big corporations, lots of money. David was the chairman and CEO from 1961 to 1980. He remained the chairman until 81, but he was not the CEO in 1981. During his time as chairman and CEO, he was also the largest individual shareholder of the bank, which like seems like a conflict of interest to me, but they didn't see it that way. So he also established branches in the Soviet Union and China. So he's trying to expand all over the world. That feels a little weird, but here we are. And he had ties to many world leaders. In fact, he said that he's never met a dictator he didn't like. So if you're curious about who he liked around the world, he would often hang out with like Dwight D. Eisenhower, Saddam Hussein, Fidel Castro, Nikita Khrushchev, Mikhail Gorbachev. You know, the world leaders. I'm sorry. I just like, I mean, you got Dwight D. Eisenhower in there, and then everybody else, you're like, should you be hanging out with these people? He was offered Bobby Kennedy's Senate seat after he died, and he was also offered a position in the United States Treasury. He declined both offers. It is said that he was so well connected and he had so much going for him that being the president of the United States of America would be a demotion. So he was like, no, why would I take either of these spots? I've got so much more that I'm working on. I can't be in politics. And he was, like I said, he was well connected. He knew and was closely associated with CIA directors. Not one director, like 4 of them. Lots of directors. It's actually rumored, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that he was often briefed on covert intelligence operations that the CIA was conducting. Because of how connected he was and all the things that he was doing, I believe that he was for sure being briefed on all these things and probably putting in his 2 cents about it too. He founded a nonprofit called International Executive Service Corps, which helps developing nations with like private enterprise, which is like a cute little thing from the outside. But I'm wondering if Chase National Bank was giving out business loans in these developing countries, and I don't know. I don't want to say what I'm thinking, but was he pulling a great great grandfather con man William Rockefeller and foreclosing or like taking back this money from these companies? Anyway, I don't know. This is just speculation here. David was a member of the Russian American Bankers Forum. So this forum was set up by the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which he was very involved with, and we'll get into that for sure. And he the whole point of this forum was to advise Russia on the modernization of its banking system. Which makes me wonder, like, if you're helping them set it up, do you have access to it and you know exactly what Russia is doing? I don't know. Are we spying on them? So anyway, I mentioned when talking about Babs, so the oldest of John Jr.'s kids, I mentioned the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and how she sat on the board. So this was set up by the 5 brothers, and I didn't mention it individually in each of them because they were all a part of it, and I thought, you know what, I'll just mention it all together again. All of Junior's children played a role in this Rockefeller Brothers Fund. The brothers had like regular brothers meetings where they would all like make family decisions together, make sure everything that they were doing individually was financially beneficial for the entire family and not just for them. David would like take notes and like almost like the secretary of these meetings. Like it was so official. And as all the siblings started to die, David basically just became the head of the family. But I don't think it was as they started to die. I think you have John the Third that handled all the social aspect of everything. And I think David really handled all the financial, all the ins and outs of everything. So anything that was happening, you had to get David's approval to do it. And as they started to get older, he started to include his son, David Jr., into this like, I don't know, it's like a secret family organization inside the family. So to start making these decisions, but they also included select others from the 4th generation, which means that they didn't trust the whole generation. And also they were like, everyone gets to know just enough. Whereas I think David Jr. kind of took over David's role. David helped with the mortgaging and sale of Rockefeller Center in the 1980s. 80% of Rockefeller Center was sold to Mitsubishi from Japan. In 2005, David gave $100 million to the Museum of Modern Art and to Rockefeller University. So $100 million to each of them. He also gave $10 million to Harvard, and a couple years later, he gave like $100 million to Harvard. In that same year, so in 2006-ish, 2005, 2006, he gave $5 million to Colonial Williamsburg and pledged that $225 million would go to the Rockefeller Brothers Fund once he died. It is estimated that he gave $900 million over his lifetime. I'm sure that part of this was like, and not just him, but the whole Rockefeller family, this was like tax evasion, right? Legal tax evasion. They're like, if we donate a bunch of money, that's a tax write-off. And also, I don't know if you guys know this, but having your own business, like owning your own business, and like not even one, they have like a million of them, it feels like, you get a lot of tax write-offs for being an entrepreneur. So that's a benefit, but also donating $900 million over your lifetime, like, yeah, you're going to get some write-offs for that. In the 1940s, David married Peggy McGrath. And together, they had 6 children. David Jr., who has taken over many of the family's affairs, Abigail Aldrich, named after David's mother, Neva, Margaret, Richard, and Aline. David died on March 20th of 2017. Yeah, he lived to be 101 of congestive heart failure, which actually makes total sense. If he really is as evil as everybody says he is, which again, we will get into, I promise, because he is something, that's for sure. Yeah, they tend to live forever. Like mean men live forever. Mean women do too. I'm not excluding women. I'm just saying like he was a mean old guy and yeah, he was going to live forever, that's for sure. But that is it. That's what we have for the Rockefellers. So we went over the second generation and the third generation. I touched on the fourth generation a bit. Like I kind of gave you like an overview of who's who and what's what. I didn't really get into them. Most of them are still like alive and kicking. There's a fifth generation, potentially at this point like a sixth generation. We're not getting into all these guys. But these are the most important people you need to know about. That's why we went so in depth on all these guys. I am opening up my Patreon, and not how I did it. So I had a Patreon a while ago, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I don't know. It was a while ago. And I had different tiers and all these things. I'm not ready to commit to all that yet. But what I am ready to commit to is giving you guys these episodes early. So like last week, you guys could get this week's episode a week early. So you guys can get next week's episode about all the Rockefeller conspiracies 1 week early, ad-free. Just go to Patreon, sign up. The link is in the show notes, so if you need help with that. Also, if you're on Instagram, the link is on, I have like a link tree in my bio. You go there, you can request episodes there. You can tell me your paranormal or alien or whatever story you want to tell me there. You can also find the Patreon there. So go check it out, guys. Thank you so much for all of your continued support. I love it so much. Thank you. Thank you. And until next week, my friends, you stay skeptical, and I'm really excited to tell you all about the conspiracy theories next time. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.